questions for our guest speakers. We will be answering them towards the end of the webinar. So I'll start with you, Joe. To introduce yourself, how did you start in the esports industry?
I got my start originally playing at Virginia Tech, where I spent 2 years forming a team as well as playing at the collegiate level and collectively won over $20,000 in esports scholarships with the team that I created. Simultaneously, I had 2 accounts that reach a rank of challenger or the top 300 within League of Legends.
Wow, that is a lot of scholarship money. How did you get into your current role? Explain how your current role fits into the esports ecosystem.
Yeah, so out of my work with the team at Virginia Tech, that's what inspired me to do a job within the industry. I sought out coaching positions at universities across the country, from Delaware to Texas to California. When I realized I wanted to develop a career in esports following my collegiate play, I took an academic dive into the issues that surround the space and began tailoring my education to the cultural issues that surround the scene. I graduated with a degree in communication studies, where I focused heavily on gender, communication, and esports. I studied the work of women in the space of gender and communication and looked to apply their work to the budding field of esports. My job at USC came out of those collegiate experiences, wherein I tied my actual academic pursuits directly to gaming and esports. And inevitably, those pursuits allowed me to find the position at Westridge School for Girls. My role now is an extension of all of that, where I gathered my creating of educational experiences and gaming experiences to now serve our student players as they move on, to college and beyond.
Very well prepared answer. And how did you discover your talent and skills in esports?
Yeah, so I always had a love for improving myself, and grinding the competitive ladder is one thing which requires nonstop drive and dedication. So I worked really hard to achieve a super competitive rank, and ultimately that gave me the confidence to drive full force into a more academic passion. Communication itself was this niche that I sort of found myself within, and I felt like I could speak onto it with some sort of confidence, because I had played all these games and I understood the esports space, but then I also took an academic dive into the things that were important to me within communication, and I figured now I have these 2 levels of expertise, why not combine them? And that simply gave me a more nuanced view with which I could talk about gaming and esports in general.
Very cool. And to you, Barrow, how did you start in the esports industry?
Yeah, so in my case, it's completely on the business side of it. So my career has nothing to do with esports or gaming at all. I was formerly an engineer. I have a PhD in aerospace. I've been working as an R&D engineer for 5 years. So I thought I was going to die as an engineer, but I switched my career and management consulting 4 years ago. And in Japan, and coming from South Korea, I grew up with StarCraft, and it was kind of odd seeing that esports wasn't that big in Japan at the time. So we thought that there was a business opportunity there, and we started a so-called Esports Advisory from 2018, and that's pretty much why I'm here today, I guess.
Wow! And how did you get into your current role? Explain how your current role fits into the esports ecosystem, and also how your career transition happened.
Yeah, great question. So my current role, like easy answer to this, I guess I made my own job at a management consulting firm, and largely what I do is there are 3 large roles. So one is I advise client mostly in the private sector side. So that includes, clients within the esports or gaming market, but also outside of it. Second is about I teach at local university at KO about esports curriculum. Third is I also advise the government over here in Japan, where the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry is the one that pushes really hard in the gaming and the esports industry. So we provide them market intelligence for their public policy making. So to answer your question, it really started as a side hustle, to be very honest with you, because my career has nothing to do with esports or gaming. But I grew up as a gamer. I have a game fanatic kids at home, so it kind of grew from there. And it's also that business opportunity, because as everybody knows, Japan has a large video game industry, but esports on the other hand was very small. So our role, I thought, was try to convince the grown-up people who's not really familiar with gaming at all, and that esports is very, very serious market. It's growing, and if you want to be any part of it, you want to act early and take it seriously what people say.
So you mentioned there's a curriculum at KO. Does that mean you can major in esports?
we're pushing it to that. We're hoping to have that done pretty soon, but we started that from 2018. We have a series of courses that we provide. It's a esports dedicated course. It's a semester long, and it's, it started as a grad level courses, but it was too popular, so it went down to the undergrad level. So the first class we were expecting about 10 people, but there were 20 people showed up, and half of them were undergrad students, and we interviewed them one by one, and everybody said they have to take it because they'd never seen a course like this. So we moved to an undergrad level course, and we were expecting 70 people, but 180 people showed up, and the same reason, right? So the way we structured the course, I guess, really resonated with the people, because we're not trying to teach everything from our side. We just open up the floor and we call in guest speakers from the industry. So we had guest speakers from Sega, Taito, HP, Microsoft, Alibaba. So all these people are already heavily involved in the industry, and if thing goes well, they may even consider hiring people from the class, and we also do that from KPMG point of view as well. And some were very lucky to get an actual job offer as well. So it's been like that so far, but we're hopefully pushing this to more of an international level, and that's what we're hopefully to achieve it sometime soon.
And just for the information of our viewers, what does KO and KPMG stand for?
Yeah, so KO is a local university, one of the top prestigious university in basically actually a lot of different places within Japan. There are a couple of campuses, so they're like everybody knows KO, and they have a very, very active esports club activity going on, including League of Legends. So that's KO. KPMG. So that's a great question, because I don't even know what KPMG stands for. It's because it's the name of the founders, which all of them are Dutch, which I have no idea how to pronounce them. But it's one of the Big Four auditing firms. So we go Big Four, including Deloitte, PwC, KPMG, and EY.
I see. And the full name of KO is?
KO University. That's it.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Gotcha. How did you discover your talents, your skill sets in esports?
Yeah, so I guess, coming from a business background, so it was less about the game playing skill, obviously, but it was more about that opportunity, and also, trying to provide a, unique value to our clients. And it was pretty obvious back then to us that, esports wasn't in very, something very mainstream at the time. And if we act early, we can actually, lead the market. So it was really that recognition, and also about that, taking a little bit of risk of what's not mainstream yet, but trying to, convince our clients that it's going to come big. And if you want to be if you want to have a, some kind of growth, monetization, or marketing or investment, you want to be part of it. So skill set wise, I would say, just, being formerly a gamer, I think it helped a lot to understand the market and where Japan is. But, acting quick, and also being a big firm, it's normally comes down to not acting individually, but also about convincing a lot of, a C-suite and the executive, that this is really important, because there are a lot of things going in their head. So the first time when I brought esports to them, it was like, what, do you want to play game at, office? That was their first reaction. So it was, it took about a year to actually convince them, actually. So it's that sort of the persistence, I would say, that you would, it will be required to actually do what you really want to do at a corporate environment.
Wow. So there are many different roles within esports. Some are more hands-on than others, and more non-endemic companies are opening esports divisions or adding roles that work within the space. We know that there are professional players, shoutcasters, coaches, etc. That stuff's all on the surface, but what other jobs are there? What skills are required for new jobs in esports? We'll start with you, Joe.
Yeah, so esports or gaming, it needs, educated professionals across every discipline as it continues to expand. So for instance, just a few of my colleagues within LA, there are game designers, competitive admins, play testers, publishers, art leads, lore and copywriters, revenue strategists, esports lawyers, right? Like even lawyers are on that spectrum of people that are within games. And so there's a level of expertise that's required across all of these different disciplines. Sure, to be an art lead, you have to have studied art, right? Or you have to have prove yourself as an artist. But you find yourself in these jobs within gaming by actually having those skill sets, right? Having the practiced knowledge and a level of expertise, outside of playing games. So it's not necessarily required that you get really good at a video game to be involved in the space. Rather, you can pursue an academic or professional degree and then tie in your personal interests to find yourself in a job and in a space that you love.
And how about you, Barrow? What's your take on this?
I 100% agree with what Joe said. If I give a little more comment on the outside point of view, from a non-endemic side of it, because that's what that's our main advisory work. Lots of our clients have nothing to do with esports or gaming with their main business, but it's an exciting opportunity. They want to find a way to associate somehow, one way or another, for marketing or monetization purposes. And it's often that they lack the market insight or just the market knowledge, because it's such a community-based market as a whole. And if you don't play any games, or if you never grew up with playing games, there's just no way that you're going to understand what's going to happen. So it's those kind of understanding the community, what's happening, the latest hack and all that. It's giving that information to the corporation. That's I think that there's a lot of need, and that's sort of our job to give that outsourced role to provide that insight to our clients. But I think as the size of the business of each enterprise gets bigger, they will probably want to have their own internal function of that. So that's one. Second is, as I said, we also advise our governments, local municipality, on public policy and how they can associate their local activity with esports, because esports, as everybody knows, it's a very great content to have community building community. So for example, in Japan, in the countryside of Japan, they are losing population. Their population is getting old, so it's for municipality. They have a lot of issues, so they're always looking for some new content where people can gather up and communicate, and just have a better quality of life. And so that's why they try to implement some sort of esports, because also they have a lot of empty facility just available, and people who can connect all those different dots together with esports. I think that's also, there's going to be a lot of market needs for that as well. Last one is that, so we some of the work that we do over here, we advise our clients that you might want to have your own esports team, although you may not have anything to do with esports or gaming, because we think that that's a really great way to brand or have a marketing channel, additional marketing channel, and it's also relatively cheap compared to, like, say, owning a traditional sports team with all the facilities. So it's trying to do that in Japan, I think, is relatively easy to do so. So that's also we're trying to drive that interest within the corporate scene.
It's a fantastic idea. Next question, is it, there's this sort of myth or this barrier that some people have in front of them. They feel like, oh, I don't have like an esports related degree. I mean, there's some universities out there like Jeonnam Techno that actually offer esports degrees, and they say to themselves, oh, I'm not good at gaming, I don't really have an esports degree, I'm not really sure if I can get in. Do you believe it's necessary to have an esports related degree or to be good at gaming to get a job in the field? Let's start with you, Barrow.
No. So how do I relate to this? So one thing I learned after I joined this firm, management consulting firm. So the framework that we approach our client is basically we have two axes. So one is about the market, the sector, what kind of market that we're dealing with. Is it like automotive or entertainment? It's several industry. And then another axis is about service line, what kind of service that we provide. So if you think from that, framework, I think it's important to have some sort of skill set, that being in the service line. So that could be some sort of a hard skill set that you learn from college. So it could be programming, just as Joe said, or it could be communication or etc. So that's that's not sector specific, that's not industry specific, that can be applied to anywhere. But then having that first, but then you being a gamer or you being an esports player, you already have a good knowledge of your market, and which is a sector market perspective. So it really doesn't matter having that specific degree or not. You might have some more insights getting out of that a degree, depending on where you take it, and also that connection to that game publisher or who's already in the field. And just like the curriculum that we're providing at KO, you can build new connections with people from within the field. But that's something that you can acquire as you go. So I don't think that's a necessity, to answer your question.
I see. And a question again for you, Barrow. Do you feel, is there overlap? I would be so interested to know between your PhD in aerospace engineering and esports.
So yes and no. So So definitely no math at all, right? So I was a control engineer, AI control engineer. So it's a lot of proof and algorithm building and all that, which was fun itself. But now we're talking about business. But in the business process, it always starts with the good market analysis, and I think that's where my training helped me a lot. So that analytical skill. So before maybe it was with data and actual like mathematical data or data that you get
Still
from
some math
driving
in
a car.
there.
Yeah. But now it's less about. I mean, there's still data, but it's less about math. But it's really about trying to make that insight and also building your own hypothesis. And trying to see verify that whether your hypothesis was right or no. And often a lot of our client works start from this hypothesis building. So our client might have their initial hypothesis, and they want to figure out whether this is business, sound making, hypothesis. And we try to do a proof of concept together. And if it works out, then they may have a chance to make it bigger. If not, then they might want to pivot it. So it's really that thought process, I think, that was very valuable from my training.
Very cool. For you, Joe, do you believe it's necessary to have an esports related degree or to have mad skills?
In short, I don't think it's necessary to have a degree. The most surefire way, in my opinion, into one of these positions is to tie your school or work experience in another field directly to esports. You don't necessarily have to have any previous esports experience, just simply like a passion for games and maybe an academic degree or something that you can connect to say, here's this other thing that I did, and it directly ties into esports because XYZ, right? So one way you might stand out amongst your competitors is to create an inclusive environment within some sort of space, whether it's the collegiate field or within a team. That was what my experience was like. But alternatively, if you're a student who's maybe interested in CS, maybe you have a upstart project that aims to tackle a nascent problem within the field. It could be something as simple as web scraping your opponent's data to collect data on your opponents for an upcoming match, right? Like then you could find your way into the work of an analyst or something like that, right? So it really just depends on what your passion is and how you can tie that to esports. It doesn't need to be a full-on pursuit of esports from minute one.
So in other words, due to the broad demands of esports as an industry as a whole, any degree can more or less be an esports related degree so long as you use your noodle.
Yeah, so long as you use your noodle or have some sort of way to tie it together. Yeah.
Awesome. That should be encouraging for lots of people out there. One of the most important things, and it's personal for me as well, how to persuade the parents in allowing you to pursue your esports dreams. Let's start with you, Joe.
Yeah, so I can speak directly to this because as a fight, I grew up every single day in the early 2000s and through adolescence in 2010 or in the 2010s. I came from a household that heavily relied on and valued academics as my parents had used their education to pull themselves out of poverty. For example, my father came from a deaf household and he ended up with a law degree that, he leveraged to get himself some success financially. So their stories placed academics at the forefront of my mind. And that's why when growing up, my brother and I inevitably had a point in time where we had pretty limited screen time. There was a point where I remember we had like an hour on the Xbox apiece, and often that we would spend it watching each other, learning things from each other. Sitting there, I'd watch him, he'd watch me, because we knew that together now we have 2 hours and we can learn from each other, right? And so we tried to use our time as best we could to get as good as we could. Inevitably, what I can tell you is that your parents will understand, and my parents did eventually. The tipping point for me was when I brought home scholarship money. That eventually lightened the financial burden from my parents, and it made them take a second look at this esports thing and say, hey, that actually works, and he brought in some money doing that. Let's let him pursue it. And it really struck home for me when my dad had put my scholarship form directly on the fridge, like similar to any paper or anything else that I had growing up, and it made academics stand out. It made me want to, or it made my esports pursuits stand out just as much as my academics, and it made me realize there is value in tying these two things together. So, inevitably my parents, now they gush about my current position, and they'll tell their friends back in Jersey or our neighbors like, oh, Joe's off doing esports things in California of all places, and they'll brag about it. And eventually your parents will too. Like I can promise that. It's just that esports is definitely different because you have to take the first 2 steps yourselves. You have to create something in a new field to get the recognition from your parents, from whomever, to say, hey, I created something within esports that has a direct tie to this academic thing or this professional thing. and then that will lead you to whatever job you want in the future.
Awesome. I love the fridge thing. Can I ask how old you were when you first started raking in those scholarships?
Yeah, so for me, it was in 2018. So I was a junior in college. That was my first, real sizable scholarship. I had previously competed at the high school level, won like a couple bucks kind of thing, and before that, all like sorts of small like LAN events. But the first like thousand or multiple thousands of dollars was in college, playing in collegiate League of Legends with Riot. We had made it to playoffs and won a decent chunk of money for ourselves, and then split that amongst our teammates.
So, what would you say to budding, talented, professional gamers who are perhaps not yet old enough to be raking in scholarships at college? Because there are people who are world champions at ages, 18, 19, sometimes even younger. Gosh, they make me feel inferior. What kind of advice would you have towards, that sort of target audience in regards to convincing parents and letting them pursue this path?
So for me, I think I gained a lot of experience actually playing on teams. For me, it was creating them myself. I had a lot of passion for, hey, we don't have, I start at the very end of my high school career, I started to hear about high schools that had esports as a recognized thing. So I was like, well, I have to get on board with that. And we ended up talking to physics teachers, mutual friends, and getting our own, esports and League of Legends club. That would be the the route that I would take. I think the sooner you can tie it to academics, the better. But if maybe that's not your thing, creating your own team is just as recognizable, and it shows a lot of communication, wherewithal to be able to do that. And so it gives you public speaking experience. It gives you just communication in broad teamwork experience. It gives you teams in and of themselves inherently give you the experience required to then work on teams within the field or within any field, within a job. There's teams quite literally in every discipline. So I think if you can create your own team in esports, not only does it service for your future, personally, but it can service for your career pursuits as well. So my recommendation would be to form a team. My recommendation would be to surround yourself with like-minded individuals who are just as passionate about the game as you are. And then all of a sudden you're improving not only your communication skills, but you're improving at the game too. And maybe that's your real passion, right? These other people talking about the game, just being involved in the space, are now leading you to get better at the game itself.
Very cool. Barrow, may I ask you how to persuade the parents?
So fortunately, I didn't have to convince my parents because I wasn't good at gaming when I was young. I grew up in the 90s in South Korea playing a lot of StarCraft, but so it was more of a casual gaming for me. But then I see that a lot in the business sense because I face that from a business standpoint that when it comes to like actually investing or doing a business in the esports space, our clients at the end of the day, a lot of them just turn down because they don't understand anything about gaming and esports. And so that's the reason why one of the things that we're trying to support as an advisory, that we're not directly part of the esports ecosystem, to be very, very honest with you. We had nothing to do within this stake, right? We're completely third-party advisory, but I think because of that, it gives us a unique position to speak that esports is a very important market. You want to do something about it in terms of business perspective. I think it speaks more than speaking from within also. So we're trying to convince a lot of our clients around the esports scene who has a slight interest, but help them to enter it. But then on the other hand, I do also agree about see that a lot of in the personal side of the convincing the parents part. So for example, we'll give it an episode. So my younger son, they both play Fortnite like crazy, and they play too much sometimes. And my grandmother, their grandmother, my mother-in-law, who takes care of them, she got she flipped one day, and she brought a pair of scissors and cut the power charging cable of my younger son's Nintendo Switch because he just played too much, and that's like, to me, like growing up with gaming, that just can't happen, right? You can't just do that. And that pretty much prompt me to we gotta do serious about this thing happening, this generation gap. So that's the reason why I wrote this book called Demystifying Esports, because I wanted to give a broad overview of what happened in the past that from the 90s in Korea, And we have, after 2 decades, this huge industry called esports globally. And historically, there was this different milestone that happened. And it's not just something, a buzzword that happened overnight. That there's a huge industry going on, community that is backed by it, so that they can understand from, from a different medium, not playing game. They may not play game for the rest of their life, but it's a book form, so that they understand in the historical point of view what happened in the past. And that's why your kids are very enthusiastic about this field. So yeah, so it's sort of like a self-advertising in the end, but yeah, that's why I wrote the book. And quick answer, read my book.
So how to / what can schools and educational institutions do to better equip, nurture, and inform the future esports generations? Perhaps establish more esports related programming in schools, or what kind of ideas do you guys have? Joe, let's start with you.
Yeah, I believe that schools should do everything they can to support their students and their interests. Based on my experience coaching, that's what I believe, and that's what I would have wanted when I was in their shoes. So, but academically, I believe there should be more leeway with the projects and the papers that students write, and I believe there should be stronger incentive to practice, your actual interests while in the pursuit of your academics. And this became a reality for me in communications. I was able to, work on my own resume, work on my own career building at very much in my junior and senior year, and it was those experiences that allowed me to build on, what I already thought about gaming, what I already thought about esports. Specifically, the class Gender Communication taught me a lot about gender communication, but there were specific projects that allowed me to tie in any of my personal interests or any of my personal experiences with communication into them. So I directly tied in esports, and I started writing paper after paper about, esports and how I felt like gender communication influenced them, which we can certainly get to a little bit later. But I also think schools should support their students through athletics and student life. And the reason those two in particular is I believe that helps it de-emotionalizes the word esports if students are supported at the collegiate level. And I think that through athletics and through student life, those are two of the most widespread collegiate organizations that can actually influence the day-to-day lives of students beyond their academics. So it makes it an extracurricular in a sense, right? It brings it beyond the classroom, and it makes it so that esports is also a recreational activity. So I think by hitting through academics, by hitting through student life, through athletics, that's how schools can really build a structure around esports that makes sense and that have students feel supported so that they can really dive into their own, pursuits, and then they can look back and say, hey, my college supported me through all of this, and that's what's going to make them look back and say, now I want my kid to go to that college because they supported me all the way through.
Very good points. How about you, Barrow? What do you think schools can do to improve esports in our culture today?
Yeah, I mean, based on my experience over in Japan, there are a lot of things happening lately, and which is very exciting. And I think one important thing is really the the connection making between academia and the corporate scene. So, for example, like the curriculum that we provide, we intentionally bring in these guest speakers from the corporate scene so that they can hire new great talent from their point of view, and for students that it could be an immediate career path for them. So having that, a clear tie that, really lends to a specific career to certain students, I think that I just can only see more demand growing once, if that kind of infrastructure is being built. So that's one. And also second is, working with the Keio University, which is very, very, good research specific, I would say. A lot of the professors that we work together, they realize that, esports as a research field is also very white spaced. So there's still a lot of things to be discovered, to be studied. It's such a, a very, it's like a gold mine of research topics, so to say. So if you are more of a, research, prone, I think there's also, government trying to be giving out more grants on esports related topics. Because I mean, when it gets to like a negative side of the esports side of it, like game addiction and all that, there's still people who try to look into that angle a lot. And I think from our point of view, we need more government grant backed research that actually breaks that sort of like a urban myth. So I think that's also going to be more needed. Second is not, third is not only about college level, but also, you know, the below. So lately what we're seeing here is that the local high school, junior high school, or elementary school, there's some club activities going on, and there's like esports club activities. So actually these are promoted by local municipalities. So they try to come up with some sort of a corporate partnership, say with hardware provider, Lenovo or HP, so that, you know, school don't have to pay for those, you know, equipments, but, you know, it's more like donated or as a partnership, and these students can actually get exposed to their equipments, but also get more exposed to esports, and it's also, you know, sort of as a club activity, which is totally, you know, totally makes sense. So I think, you know, it's still early stage right now over here in Tokyo, but if you see that in scale, I think it'll be way more, you know, interesting and see more adoption in the wide general public.
Something I did not know. So, what kind of advice would you have for students reaching to discover their skills or talents that are within the realm of esports related? For example, if one plays games but doesn't necessarily want to become a pro player, it's not the easiest path and not the most stress-free path. And you know, people who don't want to become, you know, professional players, what other career options do they have? Joe, we'll start with you.
Yeah. So based on my own personal experience, I think, again, any academic or professional endeavor has a place in esports. I think there's countless options. And so maybe talking about the right fit is certainly the challenge there. But so maybe you have yet to find that academic pursuit. Maybe you're in college and you're undecided as a major, or you have no idea what you want to pursue. I would say take a look at the games and titles that you play and try to pinpoint the issues that you see. For me, I was following Riot pretty heavily in 2018 after winning some of the scholarship money, and I sought to educate myself, you know, understanding the issues that I was seeing with them in the paper. So an example being, I believe gender communication in esports to be a systematic issue that Riot was experiencing, and that I think is systematic throughout all of esports. The work of women in the space of gender and communication, such as Deborah Tannen, points to the early 2000s and kindergarten students and the dichotomy of communication amongst genders. Wherein male identifying students displayed competitive forms of speech. So an example of that might be, I hit the ball this high, I hit the ball this high, indicating a higher height, and then I hit the ball to the sky, right? You could see a group of male identifying kindergartners going back and forth with that. And so that displays very competitive forms of speech. Where this differs in the dichotomy here is that when identifying female students, when female identifying students were in the same, you know, kindergarten discussion, they expressed cooperative forms of speech. And so one might say, my parents already contacts, and the other might say, my parents already contacts too. And so they would copy not only the syntax, but the sentiment of what was said, thereby displaying cooperative forms of speech. I believe these two forms of speech, distinctly gendered, display a disparity that we today see matured through communicative spaces online. We see it in social media. We see it, you know, day to day in our daily lives, in professional environments, and you see it in esports. And so I think that those students who were brought up from the early 2000s displayed this year after year after year. And that's why when we look at something like a competitive, something that's called a competitive game or an esport, right? That's why we see a quote unquote male dominated, you know, industry or space. However, where it is distinctly different is within the leadership of these clubs, these groups. The dichotomy, or sorry, not the dichotomy, the distinction is more, it's distinctly 50% male and 50% female within leadership of these collegiate spaces. So that's, I think, where we have to look to and where we have to build cooperative forms of speech, because at the end of the day, within leadership, cooperative forms of speech are extremely successful when paired with competitive forms of speech. So.
Fascinating. Lots of stuff there I didn't know. Wow.
But yeah, in short, tying in your academic pursuits.
So for students who want to be, you know, specifically esports pro gamer, professional player, how do they grab attention at tournaments for teams or for streamers, personalities? How do they get hooked up with sponsors? Where do they start seeing green? Let's start with you, Barrow.
I mean, I wish I could answer that with my personal experience, but unfortunately not. So I can tell it from the corporate side, enterprise perspective. So because that's one of the things that we help out our clients. So our clients include esports professional team locally here. And a lot of the things that we find out is that there is a mismatch of expectation between esports teams and sponsors. And part of the reason being that, sponsors never have done an esports sponsorship before. They never associated with the esports team before here. And also, on the other hand, esports team also being, relatively speaking, young, and they never had that, business conversation experience before. So that this expectation doesn't really, match together sometimes. And at the end of the year, they opened up the lid, and it turns out that the numbers are not very good looking. So they end up not continuing, etc. So that, negative spiral. So what we're saying is that it's really important to have the right number. At least I'm speaking for the Japan side of it. The numbers definitely for sure. So that's the number one reason why the sponsorship companies are interested in being associated with. So what are the target KPI numbers that you can provide, either that being a prize money or audience or streamers or whatsoever. So those are definitely going to be important numbers. But second, what's also interesting nowadays recently is that these social impact aspect, ESG, so-called SDGs, are also very, very important nowadays, at least over in Japan here with a lot of corporates. So if there's any way that you can show that this is not only about, playing, fun game and about the numbers, but also this actually help build local community, for example. So for example, we have a team here, professional team, very well-known professional team. They have partnered with the Kawasaki City, which is a, fairly big local municipality, and they try to represent Kawasaki City and try to do a lot of social activity as well. So they're trying to give the message that this is not only about having fun and trying to compete other teams and win, but this is also about the inclusion and diversity and trying to build that healthy community, etc. So I think that's also a very important aspect that comes out recently as well. And if for teams, it's important to build that story. Like, why are you related to? Why are you the right team to actually provide that value? And nowadays there's a lot of team out there. So if you want to build your own brand story and that story that resonates with your target sponsor, I think that's also going to be very important. That answer your question.
Yes. And you, Joe, what do you feel the professional players can do to grab the attentions of people with money in their pockets?
I think I can talk more to what collegiate players can do. So when I was attending Virginia Tech, we were pretty hard strapped for money because we were not supported formally by our university. We were the League of Legends team at Virginia Tech as opposed to the Virginia Tech League of Legends team. So, as it was entirely upstart, mostly by me. So one of my roommates and I had ended up writing, to a couple companies, local as well as just short ways away in Maryland. Inquiring for some sort of sponsorship. Hey, we'll make a jersey, we'll put you on it, we'll do all of these things, etc. It'll be attended by X number of club members every single week. We'll stream the games, etc. And eventually, one group did get back to us, and we ended up with a small $5,000 sponsorship for our team, simply as a club team, which I think is pretty rare in the space, and that gave a lot of support to what we were doing, and so I would say, if you're a collegiate team, first ask your college. If your college doesn't support you, ask whomever else you think has money, and just keep going down the line of people that you can ask, and generally show your worth, win money, win tournaments, and people will support you. And at the very least, you'll have a good time doing it. So, and it'll give you work experience, right? Like even in just writing those papers, there were a lot of no's before we got that one yes with the 5,000, right? So like, it builds character in a way, as they would say.
So we all know that getting working experience is important, but what are some ways to get started? How to reach out to teams, organizations, tournament providers, broadcasters, and other companies that sponsor or are involved with esports in some way? Start with you, Joe.
Yeah, so getting started, I think just jumping onto a team or forming your own, or if you're doing your own individual game, getting recognized and picked up by a team. If you're doing a one-on-one game like StarCraft or or Hearthstone, etc. So I think like that would be how you get your name out there, right? But I think sorry, can you repeat the question again? I'm totally lost.
It's how people, some people, in order to get jobs, they need working experience, but how do they get that working experience in the first place? How do they reach out to teams, organizations, and people with hiring capabilities to get that working experience?
I can speak to my own experience. So personally, for me, once I was through that gauntlet of academics and playing at the collegiate level, I did decide for myself that I wanted to jump into coaching, and that was one of the things that I applied to, is coaching jobs across the country. In order to show and display my coaching experience, I created my own documents of 10 to 12 pages reviewing professional games. That again, I would never show to the school because nobody wants to read that. But it was a docket for me to say, here are all the things that I think you can learn from this game, and it'll allow me to show some expertise and do a little bit of a review for the school. Another alternative would be I did individual one-on-one coaching sessions with players, across the country, and got their feedback as to how the session went. And I iterated on that process multiple times until I ended up with a coaching structure that I liked, and I again displayed that coaching structure during interviews. So it's very upstart. It's very much doing exactly what you want to do. But for me, I just looked at coaching in the scene and I said, how is it being done now? Maybe it could be done better under a microscope, or maybe it could be done better with more prep. And so I tried to put in the hours to do that. And then I took screenshots, wrote probably a copious amount and more than was necessary, but wrote a lot about each individual game and tried to dissect it for myself. And that, I think, gave me some confidence to then speak on it in the future.
And you, Barrow, how do you feel that, people can get working experience to help them build their resume?
Yeah, I mean, I agree 100% with Joe. But, I think simply put, I think it's really in my case, side hustling and leveraging what you have. So the impression that I got in this field is that, this dream esports or gaming job will never be right in front of your eyes, right off the door, So you really have to look for it, really have to build your brand, or, find the right people to do so. And the easiest way to do it is doing a side hustle. And that's, in my case, that was the case in my case as well. With, I joined KPMG as a tech consultant, and that was my main duty. But as a side hustle, I started doing esports advisory. And the first thing that I did was doing an internal seminar towards our KPMG employee. And the title was, "What is esports?" Because nobody really knew about esports. And it was really surprising, rewarding in the sense that, because normally this internal seminar, usually there are about 20 people tops, but for this esports one, there were like 50 people. It's like, whoa, there's definitely some interest going on. So, and then, kind of leverage that to writing a sort of a corporate report towards our client. And this was a marketing event. And then, that time forward, that eventually became a, curriculum, like, providing at K University, that also, build up a lot of new clients, both in gaming and esports, etc. And, and it took us about a year or two to actually, make it as an actual service that, we can actually create revenue. And in order to do so, we're going to need more people to hire. And now, we have a team of dedicated people, about 10 people working on esports and within KPMG doing that. So, it's really start from side hustle, and then, gradually, making it bigger, and then leveraging it. So basically what, Joe said, but, I'm coming from the corporate standpoint. So, but same, idea, I would say.
I see. You heard it here. It's not easy. You gotta really want it and reach out with your own hands. Once students know what they want to do and have built up some experience, sign up to job alerts to check on for job openings, what are some good job hubs out there for students to check for jobs that are available? I'll start with you, Joe. Perhaps you have some answers. You mentioned you were applying to coaching positions.
Yeah, so I originally when I first started, I was like, okay, my end goal is, in my mind, right, when I was 22, I was like, well, my end goal is professional coaching. If I can emulate that, then I can find any coaching job that I want. So I looked at all of the job opportunities for coaching or analyst experience at the top 10, LCS teams at the time. And I went through all their websites and just job hunted from each site to see what they were looking for. Long story short, almost nobody was hiring that didn't have previous coaching experience, full time. So I was like, well, I got to get that full time experience first, rather than my individual one-on-one coaching, or my team coaching with my previous collegiate teams. So I started applying to any job that possibly. The first thing I thought of was collegiate teams has to be looking for coaches, and they have to have lower requirements than professional teams. So I looked through a bunch of collegiate sites. And I found a couple of job opportunities that worked for me. One site that was helpful was Hitmarker. That's like an esports job hunting site, similar to Indeed. But that's more or less not the point. What is the point is like finding the tier in my own head of what I could apply for and what I couldn't apply for. And then once I figured, hey, collegiate could really be a space for me, especially because I know that scene inside and out, and I just played in it for 4 years. That's where I can hit my market and where I can find my niche and where I can really help students, because I will actually have been through the gauntlet, whereas even professional players can't necessarily say that, having come through the collegiate gauntlet. So I can say that for myself, and I think it helped when I could then instruct my players from that perspective.
I see. And Barrow, what do you think? Any hubs or websites that you think people can draw upon?
Yeah, so I'm afraid I don't have a really good answer for that, because I think part of the reason, like I'm based in Japan, right? So I think we have a complete total different like landscape when it comes down to like job and career. But then like, you know, like I think it kind of goes back to what Joe said earlier. Like, you know, if you want to be part of like, say, the gaming industry and the making side of it, I think there's a, you know, a solid channel for that. You know, it's like, you know, in Japan, the hiring process is like yearly, you know, twice a year, like you apply for the job in Nintendo or Sony, and, you know, if, you know, the screening process and all that. So it's pretty well established that anybody can apply for it if you have the right credentials and all that, even as a newbie. So that's one. But, you know, but like, things like, you know, jobs that are not very obvious, like for example, like casters, and like, you know, those are like not openly posted jobs. And one example that I can think of is that, you know, like one guy called Hiraiwa-san locally here, he was originally a baseball caster for NHK, which is like a CBS in the States. And he just one day announced himself that he's going to do esports 100%. So he completely quit his job at like a solid pay and all that, like, you know, great recognition and all that, and then just switched. He built his own thing, and then now he's running his own esport caster brand, you know, with several people in it, and he himself is a, you know, established brand himself. So I think the you know, the bottom line is that I think at least in Japan we are at a situation right now where you can create a lot of new jobs on your own. Like if you have a little bit of entrepreneurship, you know, a mindset, I think that there's a lot of opportunities going on right now. So you might not even need to like look for jobs, and you might actually just, you know, just try yourself, you know, and see how it goes. Yeah.
So last but not least, any tips on how to be successful in a esports career? Let's start with you, Barrow.
Yeah, I mean, so I can't really speak from an insider, right? So I'll leave the details to Joe, you know, who's, you know, being really in the center of it. But from coming from a like business perspective, you know, I think maybe I mentioned this earlier, but I think there's a clear dichotomy between this esports space and the rest of the industry. So so-called entertainment industry and the other industry. So like, you know, the car makers, the hardware makers, and all that. And I think that dichotomy is sort of a chance, you know, in my perspective. And I think these non-entertainment industry has grown a lot of appetite about having those new digital channels through game or esports to know to let people know their brands, or, you know, build new kind of experience with their customers. So I think part of the, you know, advantage that as a gamer and esports enthusiast that we have is that we know the market, we know the community, we know, you know, what kind of games are you know, really hot right now, and what the little bit of details of why it's interesting and all that. So and these are the exact information all these, you know, big name corporates lack. They don't know, they don't understand. And normally these are, you know, these corporate, they don't talk with, you know, game companies directly. They're just so different. So I think if you can, you know, find a way to make a business case to sell, you know, kind of upsell this, you know, esports, what's happening in the market, and as a market intelligence to these non-esports companies, I think that's going to be a huge opportunity for people to be successful in this space. To personally, yeah.
And you mentioned earlier that I mean, a large theme that of the talk today has been you can create your own role in esports, your own job. And you mentioned having a little bit of creativity and entrepreneurship will really help you on the way there. When, you know, this word entrepreneurship also, you know, has this connotation of risk and you know, startup to it. What sort of advice would you give to people who, you know, are thinking of creating their own roles with entrepreneurship? What sort of words would you have to help set those people on the right path? What do you think?
Great question. Yeah, I mean, it's really all about taking risk, right? I think, part of the reason why everybody is here today is like we took a little bit of risk in our path, and me as well. Like, although being in a big firm, like esports was something entirely new in the industry, nobody really knew about it, and I had to convince a lot of people that this is something is going to be big, and it did became big in Japan. So, simple answer, I don't know, like, take risk and bet on yourself. I know this is like a popular saying, but this you just gotta, if you really like the crowd that you're working with, and that the community that this is like you want to spend the rest of your, like, say 5 to 10 year at least. That's how I look into it. Like, so the next 5 years is this really what I want to spend my time in? And I'm in the middle of a mid-career, so I like to make the right decision. Like, so and if that's really the answer, like if that's a yes, then you should just go for it. I would say. I don't know if that answered your question, but it's more of a personal.
Right. No.
Yeah.
No. It makes sense. It makes sense.
Mm.
And for you, Joe, what sort of advice or words of guidance would you have for people who are interested in esports careers? What to help them set them on the right path?
Yeah, I would say what I can speak to is my experience, and that's if you want to find a job in the field, tie your academic pursuits directly to your personal interests. That's step number one. If that's esports, tie it to communication, tie it to whatever degree you're pursuing. If you don't even know what degree you're pursuing yet, look at the field that you're interested in. In this example being esports, and take a dive into the games and the titles that interest you, and read everything you can about the company that makes it, and find out the problems that they're currently having, and then try to solve them. So for me, that was, again, looking at esports as a whole, or maybe specifically 2018, the publishers that had, some controversy, and then looking for how I could solve those problems in the realm of gender and communication. So again, just find your interest, tie it to your personal academic pursuit. And if you don't have your academic pursuit, find one through looking at the publishers that you're interested in.
Awesome. Now, we do have a number of viewer questions. They are plentiful. So let's try to keep the answers informative and efficient. We'll start with number one. If I want to be an esports coach, is it necessary to be a professional? Let's start with you, Joe.
No, I don't think so. There are a lot of esports coaches who have never played the game professionally in the collegiate space. So you can look at, I wish I knew names off the top of my head, but there are definitely LCS orgs, which is the League Championship Series, which does not have people who are former players. My experience as a former player, I know that my job could be done if you had no experience playing the game. Because again, a lot of what I do focuses on communication, how I can get my players to talk to each other better and express their concepts about the game. But me knowing those definitely helps a little bit, but it's not the end all be all. And often it's siphoning from the team different perspectives and different views on what they want to talk about or what's important to be shared amongst the team. And anyone can do that. And then, talking shop, having some sort of terminology is of course relevant, but knowing it to the fullest extent isn't necessarily required.
Question 2. If I have a team now, how do I get sponsors and company to sign us? Barrow.
Ooh, so yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is that you really want to make your deck ready, like what's the offering that you're gonna actually offer to the sponsors, and this will depend on what kind of also regional are we talking about, but my impression with the North American market is that they are very, very familiar with esports sponsorship. So you want to have that deck ready that includes the right numbers and also the right story. And also, the uniqueness of how you differentiate with other teams and how you're gonna, I think a lot of the thing about it is really about growth. So if you can show that, you can grow like way more than the other teams, I think that could be a really strong selling point.
Awesome. Question 3. It's so important to get parents to support, you're telling me. What would you advise parents of today's generations to the reality of the esports wave now? I'll have you both answer this one. Start with you, Joe.
Yeah, again, for me, it was showing that there's money there. But I think I would have also gotten there showing that I can tie my academics to the field. A lot of gaining your parents' support or gaining an elder support or anyone who's older is proving that your new framework has some sort of structure that ties into an older framework. A lot of education, a lot of professions are built upon the past, right? So it's iterating on, if you were previously a lawyer who delved in maybe commercial litigation or something, right? If you can have a new tie into esports, it's just simply different commercial space, right? So it's iterating on processes that already exist and proving that there's a new and innovative structure here. And often I think people will inevitably embrace that.
Barrow, what would you advise parents of today's generation to the reality of the esports wave now?
I'm gonna be really short. Let them read my book because I really wrote that book for that. Really, I mean, it's. I think it's as Joe said, all the needed information is out there. It's happening. There's a whole industry around the world. They're just not seeing it yet, and we're just. I think it's just finding the right pathway to let them understand. And it could be, in Joe K, it was bringing, financial, feedback back into home. But if you're not there yet, I think, there you got to find a different medium to let them know, let them understand what's happening. And it could be showing a YouTube video or like bringing them to a actual esports event, or a lot of different ways depending on who your parents are. But if they like reading books, let them read my book.
And just for the viewers out there, just to remind them, the title of that name is Demystifying Esports, and for our Western audience, you can find it on Amazon. Okay, next question. Is being a streamer a way to get attention from sponsors? Start with you, Joe.
Absolutely. I mean, there are a ton of streamers in the space that are sponsored. I think as a collegiate player, there's also an interest in developing your own personal brand. I think that a personal brand is more so what's going to go a long way than your individual skill in streaming. And to that end, even as a player, it's important to develop a personal brand, because if you look at professional sports, right, the players who have a story, often those are the ones that get their story told and then get more marketing surrounding them. If you look at esports, those with a story right behind them, those with a long career behind them, those are again the people who get talked about. So if you start your career early, if you start streaming early, making educational content, doing any number of things within the space, if it gets traction, it's going to lead to your sponsorship in the future.
Awesome. Next question, directly targeted towards Barrow. In your book, Demystifying Esports, you bridge the gap between generations regarding esports. What are the biggest misconceptions and ways to create more understanding? What can, and a side question to that is, what can universities do?
Thank you for taking a look at my book, by the way. So thanks for the question. So yeah, that's a great point. The frustrating part that I found out throughout this writing book journey was about that, the negative connotation towards gaming, like especially in Japan, like everybody plays it. The gaming population over here is crazy, almost like the half of the entire Japanese population, but it's still a guilty pleasure that everybody plays in the subway and all that. And so trying to make that breakthrough that, there are people actually being involved full time and making, their livings and actually doing really good. That was really hard. So I think, this is going to the same answer again, but it's really like, I think different people, different generation have different, channels to have them understand what's going on. So I think educational side of it, that's going to be very important, as the question pointed out, and not only about the college level, but we're talking about a senior level. So some of the activities going on over here is that the what do you call it, the nursing houses, and there's some nursing houses over here that actually embraced gaming esports. So some of there's some games that you can actually move, right? So you can play the drums and you can play race. So they actually embrace those games to build community. And they're learning that, this is what their grandson was playing, and they're actually doing by participating, and they're actually building more friends through that. Like, because nursing home normally, especially the guys when they get old, they tend to shut down and they don't want to hang out with other people, but they know how to drive and all that. So I think it's really finding the right medium, the right channel to really resonate with the right generational crowd. And at the end of the day, it kind of falls down to what really fun means. Gaming is just another form of having fun, and for the older generation, they have different things to have fun with. And I think trying to make that bridge, that actually it's essentially the same thing. That's really the core part of it, I think, as a message, if that answers your question.
Cool. This next question is worded. Okay, so the question is worded as how to make kids know, quote unquote, don't play too much. Oh, okay. This sounds like a parent asking how to make their children not to over game. Let's start with the parent, Barrow.
Oh yeah, I can talk about this all day. So I got 3 children, 2 boys, 9 and 7. They're Fortnite, like they've been playing like almost like 4 or 5 hours a day until last week, and we made a change of a policy change, in-house policy change, and basically the idea is that they have to earn their gaming time before they play games. So before it was like pretty much you can play as much as you want to do, but now like before they play game, they really have to earn their right to time. So for example, they may do their homework first, and that may take an hour. Then they have an hour to play their game, or they may play with their younger sister who's like only 6 months old, and for 2 hours, then they have 2 hours credit, to play games. And if you can, if they can charge those credits to play games, they can within that time they can play as much as they want. So this has come out after some trial and error for several months. Because being games, we all know that it tends to get longer than you expected, and being a parent, so you kind of be in that spot. Whether I understand that as a also part gamer that it's really fun, but also being a parent, it's hard to try to step in and stop them from that experience, because it's really a playground to make connection with your friends after school and all that. But as a parent, you do have to need to give guidelines and all that. So that's how we're coping right now in house.
Next question is, a lot of professional gamers play professionally at a very young age. Some might even drop out of schools. How can they get the balance between school and gaming? Joe, question for you.
So for me, I always I always was pursuing school all the way through. So it was very clear to me, this sort of structure in my head, that kind of, followed the lines of something along the lines of like, hey, family, friends, school, etc. And then esports was always just under all of those very important things, right? So if I finished all of those, in my mind, structures, if I maintained all of those relationships, if I finished all my schoolwork, that's when gaming came in. And honestly, to play at a professional level, it has to fill the rest of the time. Because if anyone's putting in more time than you, they're going to be better, right? If they're putting in just as much practice time, right? And again, that's what's crucial there, is making sure that the time spent is actually efficient. And I think that process, or that idea, was brought onto me at a very young age, because again, when we did have restricted time on the Xbox, or whatever your family household game system is, that hour made me want to be very efficient with that time. And then when those restrictions were lifted, when we got to a point where my parents were like, I don't care if you play video games, right? Essentially that structure made me have that time be very practiced, and that's what I wanted to instill. So my structure throughout college was essentially go to school, maintain your friends' relationships, but the second you get home, it's league until you lose. Okay, you lost, go to the gym, come back. Oh, you get back from the gym, keep playing league. That was kind of how that went, and like that gym process was just a de-stressor for me, and I would highly recommend it to anyone who's trying to pursue a game professionally. But like, there was a structure there, and that was friends, family, education. Maybe there's some other things I'm missing, but then esports right below all of the important stuff.
Actually, if nobody has any objections, I want to answer this question as well. So in Korea, they have a system where for certain especially talented gamers, they're allowed a sort of, not entirely a school exemption, but they're allowed to go to a special school program that allows them to downsize the schoolwork and increase their esports time. Perhaps they're living at a team house or something like that. This might be something we slowly see emerge over time in other cultures as well. But until then, what I would recommend, as somebody who was gaming a lot in those years, is that there's a reason why elementary school you learn so broadly, and then it starts to narrow once you're in university, because they want to give you options. And I would, even if you are extremely good at the game, keep your options open. Lots of people don't know what they want to do, even way later in life, and career changes happen all the time. I mean, Barrow, the aerospace engineer, doctorate holder, and now is working in esports. So not only that, but don't think that investing time in school away from esports is going to make you a worse player. I've seen the opposite happen, where professional gamers say, okay, well, I want to go back to school, and they go to school full time. And now all of a sudden their hours are reduced and they're more limited, and their time is more precious. They think about it differently, and their practice time all of a sudden becomes much more efficient, and they actually start winning more games. So don't think that investing time in your academics is going to take away from your esports, as long as you're able to play more than 10 minutes a day within reason. So that's my 2 cents on the topic. Next question, directed at Joe. Do you think we need more female gamers in the scene? Is it more difficult for a female to enter the field?
So within my team at within my team at USC, our first year we had no female identifying players on the team. The first year I came in, that was just the players who were there, took the best players we had, and there were no female identifying players. By year number 2, we did have a female identifying player step up and say that she wanted to play and participate in tryouts, and she made it onto the team all through her own play, right? And so she was a starting varsity player. However, that player was a senior, so she was there 3 years before I got there, right? And she had seen, the team, or was somewhat aware of it, but was never really incentivized to join until the team started winning, and there were distinct changes in the way that everyone communicated, and it seemed like a team to be on, right? That was inclusive and took in players irrespective of any spectrum of things, right? So making an inclusive environment is the single most important thing that allows for any gender or any race or anyone to be involved in esports. Where I saw this a second time is actually at Westridge School for Girls. While it's an all-girls school, it started because of one student's interest. She had a distinct interest in game design and saw that universities are creating esports and said, hey, this is loosely a thing, and I think we should have it here too at Westridge. And so her experience led to that team becoming a thing, and her drive and her passion made all of her other interested friends join, right? And so that core group of 6 players in our first year was all out of her drive and her interest. No player on that team had played the esport title that they play before the day one where I stepped onto campus. The most experience they had was playing Minecraft. So anyone can do it as long as the environment is inclusive enough. And where I see this every single day with that team is, after practice, they'll talk about D&D. They'll talk about a million different other passions that have nothing to do with esports or with gaming that we just did, but they're talking about what they as students are interested in, and it makes them want to come back day after day, beyond what we're doing and talking about communication or talking about an esport. So inclusivity is the short answer.
Awesome. Next question. For collegiate esports teams, our university isn't supporting us. What can I do, and how do I gather more gamers within the school? Joe.
Yeah, so for me, step number 1 is your recruitment opportunities. If there is any opportunity to speak about your clubs, that's step number 1. Simply increasing your student population and the size of your club means that you, in a sense, get power. By the time I graduated Virginia Tech, I believe our esports organization was the largest sector on the school's campus outside of Greek life. And so while that might not make a lot of sense internationally, but Greek life is pretty big here in the US. So when we did have that come to fruition, we began charging dues and getting our own funding from our students. Again, it was like a $10 due, and that meant that you could get food at every single meeting. We could host tournaments with that money. We could do a whole number of facilities and be self-sufficient as a club. Later, when we went to student life and we went to athletics, and we tried to sell this model to the school as, hey, we already have a growing esports program, take us in. Our recreational sports program picked it up as a recreational sport at Virginia Tech by the time I was graduating. So we had laid the groundwork to do intramurals and in-houses semester after semester within League of Legends. I believe even our first year, we had 12 teams for 60 players that were participating. And that was in year 1. So, but you can imagine how that grew by years 2 and 3. And eventually Rec Sports said, hey, this is big enough, we're going to pick this up. And then now all of a sudden you have a little bit more backing, not just from students and student funding, but from the university and Rec Sports. Hopefully at Virginia Tech, where I see that going is eventually maybe it does become a varsity sport. Just recently, they started testing out Rocket League and hosting their own tournament as an administrative group among Rec Sports. So long story short, start with your students, grow the population as large as you can, get some bargaining power at the university, go to the university and say, here's what I've done, here's what we can do. And even if the broader university says no, look back at athletics, look back at student life, because your university is far more departmentalized, and all it takes is one yes from one department.
Okay, I am getting the note that we don't have much time left, but there are just a few questions left. Let's see if we can get through them. Considering the future of esports, what skills are important to develop as you're studying? What type of skills do you need to demonstrate in starting your careers in esports? Joe.
Hands down, esports specifically, I would say communication and analytics. I think between myself and Baro, that's probably what we have the most of here. But I think that holds true across esports specifically. If you want to find yourself on a professional team, on a professional org, that those would be the two routes. But again, broadly speaking, they need everybody. So you can do any sort of academic pursuit. And gaming is again an entertainment communication system and is even more broad in what it allows for, as Baro was mentioned.
Okay, next question, short but sweet. Besides helping brands to advertise / serving like a marketing agency, how can esports teams play a role in the ecosystem and crossing over with other industries, Baro?
I think the core part of it is really the brand. So, it's again, this goes back to the industry that has nothing to do with esports or gaming or non-entertainment. So, for example, if you're an automaker, the only way you can interact with your customer was car dealership and all the local shops. And is that enough? No, it's not. And we have places like Tesla and all that, and all the same goes for food production maker or all these traditional industry. They have their established channels, but that's pretty much it. And if you try to resonate with the younger generations, so Gen Z and all that, it's just not gonna be very effective. And that's where we think that owning an esports team, out of that being it could be as professional as trying to compete with a really shiny tournament and all that. That could be that level, but it could be as very casual as like owning a club team. We have our own club team within KPMG as well, and that itself is also very valuable with, as Joe said, communication with internal, employees and making all these different connections, and also with your clients. We do hold, in Japan, we have this sort of building culture with having a inter-company tournament league going on. We had that last week with PUBG with about 120 different companies being participating. So, I think a lot of the existing companies are screaming for different channels to have a different way of letting their brands know or having more digital points. And I think owning an esports team is definitely a very effective way of doing so.
Okay, let's speed run this. Next question for Baro. Is it very competitive to enter the field in Japan?
Field meaning esports field?
Yes.
Yeah, so I would say yes, no. So the thing is, esports being relatively young, so I think there's still a lot of different ways of entering it. So if you mean by like entering as an esports professional team, so there's about, this is about last year, but there's about like 100 teams more or less that is being active here in this space. But the top teams are still like I'd say less than 10 teams, and there's an organization called Japan Esports Union where they deals with the certification of being a professional and the titles. So there like different ways of being associated with them. And now what's missing in the scene right now is really like sort of the minor league kind of ecosystem. So I think US is way more ahead of the game with the CSL or the collegiate scene going on, but we still don't have that sort of a unified collegiate scene where students can casually enter and try to make their pathway upwards to a professional scene. But we still don't have that, which also could be a very huge business opportunity, so to speak.
Right. Gamers tend to retire early in life. What advice do you have for young gamers after the career is over, Joe?
I would say get involved in coaching, especially at the collegiate level. As more schools begin to invest, I think students are going to be, I think their talents are going to be best suited to help students who are interested in what they've already done, right? They'll have a lot of respect for those players and they'll be able to learn and grow from them specifically. Alternatively, I think advocating for players' rights within the space, for their former teammates, their former colleagues. I think that's another route that they could go. Working hand in hand with the publisher to say, here, these are the plights of a serious gamer based on my literal 10 years of experience within the field at the highest level. And I think building a path for the publisher to be more, instructional or helpful to the player's path, or creating more structure for the actual orgs based on the publisher's requirements. I think those are ways that players can give back, but also, continue their career.
Okay, and 2 questions left. I think esports is like any other new sport that needs to be educated to the public, so I really appreciate all the various entities who are putting in the effort to do so. How can we contribute in this area, Baro?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think, keep like keep educating, right? So find the right. I think it's important to find the right niche. So in my case, it was about this business crowd, right? So being KPMG, we deal with enterprises all the time, and to our all these important people, they know nothing about esports. So that was my niche, and I try to educate them through in the form of running seminars or like whatsoever or educational form. So I think if you can find your own niche in that sense to educate and I think that's going to be a really good start for you. And even if you go further to that route, you can even find your own service or product to actually provide to that crowd, and that could be even end up being a new business, so to say.
Right. Okay. When people start pursuing an esports career, what should they look for when choosing an esports team, Joe?
I think an inclusive environment is number one, but I think finding your first team, if it can be one that you can learn from, is the most important thing. So for me, when I did have my team at Virginia Tech, I was one of the more talented players on the team. There was less I could learn from game to game, and it was more so me teaching and building the communication structure that I wanted to see for the rest of my teammates. But I started to realize that and said, hey, I'm not learning as much as I could be. Why don't I join another private team, an amateur team, just sort of the very, very top professional level, but try to compete on a tier 2 team, and maybe I can learn from those players. And so in doing that, I was able to take a lot of my learnings and feed them back into my collegiate team and say, here are all the things they're doing in the amateur scene that we're not currently doing as a team. Let's do X, Y, and Z. And then as our players built and got stronger, I was learning from now 2 teams, and I could jump back and forth and say, here's some insights here, here's some insights there. And so while I don't necessarily think you have to join 2 teams, I think joining one that the players are better than you is absolutely crucial, and joining one where you get to serve as a mentor is absolutely crucial. So maybe those can be one and the same, but finding the opportunity to be on both, I think, is the best case.
Personal comment I have on this question is that a lot of esports teams, like Barrow was mentioning earlier, they open the lid at the end of the year and they're losing money, and they make the decision to go under. So be very careful when you're being made an offer. If the team is a storied team with a history of success and is a, for lack of a better term, legit team, then go for it. But always be mindful that there are people running business and numbers in the back, and the esport team is still a business. So if it's not making money, it's going to go under. Just be mindful and make sure that the work environment isn't toxic. There are some toxic work environments which can lead to the complete destruction of the team. If you want a good example, just Google Quantic Gaming. So those are my comments on that question. So that leads us to the end of our webinar. So for the closing remarks, thank you for watching today's webinar. Hope you all enjoyed. Thank you so much again to Joe and Barrow for sharing with us so much about esports and your insight and expertise and some tips on how to plan your esports career. We're so proud to see recognition rising in esports education globally, and are looking forward to collaborating with you soon. Stay safe and stay tuned.